Have you ever played Magic the Gathering? The popular computer game launched in 1997 on Windows 95? These days, if someone's talking about this computer game, they often call it Shandalar, based on the plane of domina that it takes place in. Obviously, this game is ancient these days, and I finally managed to get it working, so I figured I would outline my experiences with what is probably the greatest simulation of old school Magic. And when I say old school Magic, I don't mean any of the formats that are around now. I mean the feeling of only having a pile of cards, and everyone else also only having a pile of cards. The past couple days I've been scraping the bottom of the barrel for any scrap of remotely playable garbage. I've never been as excited to draw an Ashnod's battle armor as I was while playing this game. The pure aura of getting hold of a lightning bolt is hard to describe, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, when you start a new game, the first decision you make is what difficulty to play. The choices are Apprentice, Magician, Sorcerer, and finally Wizard. Apprentice is the easiest difficulty, and you start with more gold and gems, the enemies have less health, and your starter deck will be one color. Which is really ideal because the color fixing in this card pool is rare and difficult to acquire. Magician gives you a little less gold and gems and a 2-color deck. Sorcerer gives you a 3-color deck, and Wizard gives you a 5-color random pile of cards. Wizard is the hardest difficulty, and since I've never played this game before, that's the difficulty setting I chose. But before you get to see your deck, you have to design your appearance. As far as character creators go, this one brought me some joy. It's really funny. It seemed only fitting that I went with a classic wizard look and set upon my journey. The game plops you down in a randomized spot, and so begins this classic RPG. On the map are different enemies to duel that correspond to the type of terrain you find them on. As an example, druids are mono-green players that you'll find in forest terrain. There are also cities where you can get quests and buy or sell cards and edit your deck. So naturally, the first thing I do is see what deck list I'm working with. It was a bit of a nasty shock to find out I only had 1 forest and 2 islands and 3 mountains. But hey, you gotta start somewhere. Luckily, you start with 46 cards, and my deck only needs to be 40 cards, so I can immediately cut the green from my list to at least smooth over the consistency. It's not like I'll be able to cast any of those cards anyway. Then I debate for a long time on whether I should cut Cursed Rack or Jandor's Saddlebags. Cursed Rack is never really going to do anything, because if my opponent has enough card advantage that Cursed Rack does anything, then there's no chance I'm winning that game. Jandor's Saddlebags does have some potential to do stuff, but it's a pretty bad card. I don't think either of these cards will help me win. I debate this for a while and toy with pulling out colored cards instead, because at least I'll be able to cast Cursed Rack, but I do decide to leave Cursed Rack out in the end. I then buy a Dancing Scimitar and a Plains to help smooth my list out a little bit. I throw Dancing Scimitar and the Plains in the list and replace Orcish Artillery and Ghost Ship, simply because they both require 2 color pips and I have 2 islands and 3 mountains, so I don't think I'll be casting them too often. After that, I get a quest to help bolster my collection, and pretty much exclusively focus on getting better cards from this point on. If you're more aware of modern games than you are of Windows games from 1997, which I'm assuming you are, you might be a bit confused by all this. I know I was. As far as I've seen, there are 3 main types of quests. Delivery quests just require you to travel to a specific place, usually delivering a letter. Battle quests require you to defeat a specific enemy class, usually one that's found roaming the terrain the town is surrounded by. And the last style of quest I found requested a card type, like a red sorcery or a green summon or something like that. All these quests are pretty simplistic, but do add a level of complexity and provide an excellent method of getting cards and other rewards. There's also a whole plot, but if I'm being real with you guys, I'm just here to sling virtual cardboard, but it does have something to do with beating up the 5 Grand Wizards or whatever they call themselves. There's one for each of the colors, and I haven't battled them yet because my deck sucks. I mostly avoid confrontation while I look for anything that'll help my deck with having any level of consistency or any semblance of a win condition. I eventually get jumped by a red sorcerer and it goes, well, not great. At this point, I'm still struggling with the UI. I'm not really sure what all the buttons do, but I'll figure that out. My first hand is just lands and Jandor's Saddlebags, plus an Unholy Strength, so that's probably good against mono red. I hit the curve perfect Saddlebags when I get lightning bolted. At this point, I'm pretty positive nothing I do will have any chance of working, but you never find out by giving up, so I played it out and lost. Anti took one of the worst 2-mana 1/1 flyers you've ever seen, but it was still a 2-mana 1/1 flyer in a deck list that made my heart skip when I drew a fucking Grey Ogre. After that humiliating loss, I continued my search for slightly playable cards, and found this generated mountain that gave me a Jaloom Tome. Considering my circumstances, that Jaloom Tome is almost playable, and play it I will. Randomly generated spots like this appear in all 5 of the terrains, but it does have a different appearance for each one. It's a shipwreck for blue, ancient ruins for white, a mountain for red, a graveyard for black, and a tree grove for green. I tried to avoid fights while I got my deck more consistent, but enemies spawn in constantly and beeline for you if they see you, so I got stuck fighting this mono white priest. I wasn't looking forward to mono white with a pile of cards, but here we are. And luckily, Jandor Saddlebags is here, and for my second game in a row, I played this stupid artifact on curve. At this point, it just feels like I'm being bullied, but I have no one to blame but myself. There are 3 settings with better decks I could use if my ego wasn't so frail, but here I am, playing against mono white with 4 color nonsense, featuring exactly no card draw or color fixing. I'm complaining, but this was going pretty well for me. I got out 2 decent creatures pretty early on, and I was able to trade fairly well with the white deck, and was fortunate enough to be under the Meekstone. It's really lucky that the AI doesn't have the best threat assessment, because after some questionable removal choices, I was able to trade out all of the creatures and eventually slowly win the game with Bird Maiden. But these fights were brutal. Having bad cards makes winning games much harder, and the most humbling and embarrassing part of all this was losing to bad cards and bad AI. And these games were all for Anti, so this was a pretty brutal experience. It hurt especially bad losing cards that were pretty good. I lost my Island Sanctuary to Green Stompy, then immediately got jumped by Mono Red. But that deck drew really bad cards, and I didn't draw really bad cards, and I was able to get another victory. This whole experience was like bashing my head against a wall, but then it all turned around. I found a copy of Mishra's Factory, and I knew I needed it. So I sold my copy of Ghost Ship and my copy of Curse Rack, and had enough to get my first Mishra's Factory. Things were looking up. At this point, I've cut to white, black, and red, which allows me at least a semblance of consistency. I could have arguably cut either black or red, since I didn't really have the support needed to be 3-color, but I didn't have any better cards, so I stuck with Mardu for now. The next village had a copy of White Knight, which I felt was a pretty strong include in my pile of cards, since the deck was mostly white at this point. To acquire the funds for White Knight, I sold off my Orcish Artillery and my Water Elemental. A first strike 2/2 is pretty useful at this point. I also left the deck at 41 cards because I couldn't be bothered to figure out which of these bad cards was the most bad. Not that struggling over that decision would have mattered because I took 2 steps out of town, got jumped by a red sorcerer, and look at that, my White Knight is the ante. And my opening hand was a Banala Shiro, that fucking Jandor Saddlebags, and 5 lands. Then I drew lands until I got so frustrated I just conceded, losing the White Knight I just worked so hard to get. Man, this game can really kick you in the dick. I lost a lot of these early games, but despite the setbacks, I had so much fun. I didn't have fun drawing only lands or losing my White Knight, but after this game I stumbled across a random event that changed everything for me. I encountered a Mandarang dragon, guarding a horde of valuable spells. I could tell this was not someone to trifle with, but copy, artifact, and contract from below were so tantalizing I couldn't help myself, so I agreed to the duel. It was after I accepted that I found out I didn't have to ante for this match, so the stakes were simply my ego, and that was already curb stomped, so I figured what's the worst that can happen. Well, I start at 11 life, and this dickhead starts at 24, so I'm pretty sure I'm in for a rough time. But hey, if I can get screwed and flooded, maybe he can too. My opening hand is not the worst I've had, and I have some plays, and I figure Evil Presence might be useful here, as this deck I'm playing against is probably more than one color. Sure enough, the fourth land he drops is an island, and at first opportunity I change it to a swamp, hoping that won't bite me in the ass. The game goes pretty well, but he does manage to cast a Carrion Ants because of my Evil Presence, but I suppose this could be worse for me. And it ends up doing nothing because he uses it to chump my clay statue. Regeneration seems really good in this game because I don't think the computer necessarily understands it. If they see a kill on something with regeneration, which they often will, especially on clay statue, they'll block it pretty much every time. Clay statue put in a lot of work for me, and I suspect it has to do with its 1 toughness. But the AI isn't the only idiot in this game. I chump his second Carrion Ants, figuring I can kill it with my first strike Tundra Wolves, but then he just pumps it, and I lose my wolves for no reason. The price of stupidity is luckily not too high in this particular round, for I've already gotten his life total close to mine and I'm feeling pretty confident, but also confused as to why this matchup is easier than generic red enemy number 1. C'est la vie. Luckily, my angry mob came in clutch here and helped me defeat this boss mob, swinging in for the win. I got my hands on a copy artifact, a righteousness, a Tempest Ifrit, and a contract from below, one of the strongest Magic the Gathering cards of all time. This thing is insane. Draw 8 cards for 1 black mana. Sure, you need to ante 1, but pshaw. How the fuck are you losing that game if you just filled your hand to 7 for 1 mana? Well, to answer that question I just asked, is that if the cards you draw are really bad. Out of fear of losing this card or having it lose me more of my other cards, I didn't put this in my deck until I had more support for it. Still, I had my hands on some power and things were looking up. Until I took 2 steps and got jumped by mono white again. Savannah Lion, Swords to Plowshare, and he got me by turn 4. This game sucks, man. But I kept at it. Even when I was losing, I was still having fun. Collecting cards and feeling the rush when I'd ante a rare card and managed to keep it was so brutally juxtaposed against the crushing defeats and having cards ripped out of my deck, which felt so invasive and cruel. I'll be honest, most games these days are so cushioned to safeguard players from this visceral feeling that in its own way, it's kind of refreshing. Magic the Gathering from 1997, also known as Shandalar, is like the Dark Souls of single-player RPG card game simulators. Like, I had so much fun with this, and you know what? My persistence started to pay off. It was slow and gradual at first, but I started to win more, and not just when my opponent got mana screwed. Then I started to get my hands on more powerful cards. I got a hold of a strip mine, then I completed a quest for Cold Snap Keep, which granted me any creature card. I debated about this for a while. There aren't many super on-rate creatures at the time, and my low end was mostly okay. Banala Shiro and Tundra Wolves aren't the worst 1-drops to ever exist, so I set my eyes on the high end. At this point, I was really struggling against anything big that got dropped on me. So I debated between Serra Angel and Shivan Dragon. Now, Serra Angel is probably the more correct choice, as I'm heavily in white at this point, but as my collection grows stronger, I am stepping away from white, at least a little. So, after a debate that went on for longer than I'd like to admit, I settled on Shivan Dragon, because it's a fucking dragon, and I was so excited to cast this bad boy. I used up an any creature on this over something practical like a Hypnotic Spectre or Prodigal Sorcerer. And this is the deck list I have currently. It's not good, and I really shouldn't be attempting 3-color right now, but I don't really have much of a choice. I also think it's more fun trying to make more colors work. It's more of a puzzle. But my land base is 6 plains, 2 islands because I need lands, 5 swamps, 4 mountains, and 2 Mishra's Factories, which are probably the best cards in this deck. I love the Factory, it single-handedly won me games before. Then, the white creatures are Tundra Wolf, Pearled Unicorn, and Banala Shiro. Those are decent enough, but my card pool is so bad I'm still running Healing Salve. At least for the moment. Disenchant and Righteousness are the closest thing to removal I really have, so it's rough out here, and the only black cards I have worth running are Wall of Bone and Unholy Strength. I'm still too scared to risk my contract from below. The only red cards I'm running are creature cards, and Grey Ogre is fine, but Bird Maiden is the most game-winning card in this deck other than maybe Mishra's Factory, or Dancing Scimitar. I'm really excited to test out Shivan Dragon though. I do want to get more red sources and things to do with that red mana, but until I start getting some good removal, this is kind of the best I can do. Dancing Scimitar is really good. It dodges pretty much all damage-based removal and it has flying. It's slow as hell to beat someone out with, but it does get the job done. Jaloom Tome, Fountain of Youth, and Amulet of Krug are just in the list because I have nothing better to replace them with, but they've all shined in rather specific moments. The problem with these cards is that they kind of just solve problems that they helped created by being in the deck at all. Like sure, Fountain gives me some resilience when I'm just drawing bad cards, and Jaloom Tome can help me dig away from bad cards, but they are both bad cards that just exasperate the problem by existing in the deck in the first place. It's a real problem, but one I'm working on fixing. The point is, I'm really excited to try out this Shivan Dragon. Then I managed to get my hands on a City of Brass, which is just a lovely card to have when you're playing more than 2 colors and have no dual lands. After this, I found a copy of Immolation for 20 gold, and this might be the most underrated card in this game. Immolation costs 1 red mana and gives Enchanted Creature +2/-2. This card is so versatile. I have killed so many Birds of Paradise and Black Knights and Hypnotic Specters, and so many of Magic's playable creatures at the time are less than 2 toughness. Not everything, obviously, but this card also turns Dancing Scimitar into a 3/3 flyer instead of a 1/5 flyer. So this card just slaps. It's helped me win as many games as Mishra's Factory. That being said, I am still too afraid to play my good cards like Contract, City of Brass, or Strip Mine. But then, as things were starting to go well, tragedy struck, and I ran into the High Priest. Apparently, the evil white wizard has sent his most trusted servant to test my strength, and he's not even giving up a card, but my ante is Shivan Dragon, the card I spent the most on at this point. The card I've never seen in my hand, and have never cast. The tension on this match was palpable. I couldn't back out. I couldn't turn away. I had no choice but to hope that the randomized pile of cards I drew would be enough to see me to the finish line. Feeling everything but prepared, I faced my foe. My opening hand was about as good as you could expect, except I had no white mana sources and only white creatures. Hopefully this changes. I draw a clay statue, which is at least a creature I can cast, and then High Priest discards a balance to hand size, and I'm really starting to panic. I'm in way over my head and straight up not having a good time. Luckily, I then draw a Tundra Wolf followed by a Righteousness. 2 spells I could totally cast if I had a single white mana. I draw the mana and start casting threats, but would you believe the mono white player running balance had some efficient removal on hand? Yeah, I know, I was shocked too. Luckily, I draw Fountain of Youth, and you know you're in for a real competitive game when you're looking at your board and you see a Fountain of Youth and an Amulet of Krug. I was hoping the AI would use its disenchants on these pieces instead of the ones that won me the game, but no such luck on that wishful thinking. Because, while my board state consists of an Ornithopter, plus the Amulet and Fountain, White Priest, High Lord Asshole over here, casts Armageddon and kicks my ass down with White Knight and Mesa Pegasus. But don't worry, I drew a Dancing Scimitar and then a Holy Strength, so the odds of coming back from this are actually 0. To stop wasting my time and get over losing my Shivan Dragon, I concede and die a little on the inside. Then I stumble into my first dungeon and wander around a bit to get the lay of the land. Then I lose to the first opponent and the dungeon disappears. So much for that. I keep on playing for a bit, losing games here and there and winning just enough to keep me from rage quitting when I stumble upon another dragon hoarding rare cards. These cards are Thunder Spirit, Power Surge, Badlands, and Balance. All of these are playable in my deck, but I'm definitely most excited about Badlands and Balance. I did so well against the last dragon, I figured why the hell not, let's give this a go. Unfortunately, my opening hand is 6 lands and an Unholy Strength, but hey, I've thinned out a lot of my lands, so now I'll probably just draw gas all game, right? Well, Whim goes first and drops a Mox Jet turn 1, so this might not go as well as I had envisioned. Then he drops a Meekstone, which is mostly fine. My deck doesn't really struggle to get under Meekstone, so unless I'm unlucky, I should be able to play through it fine. On turn 2, Wim does literally nothing, and I think either he's holding up a terror or maybe his hand really sucks. This might not be so bad. So I draw a Moorish Cavalry and a Bird Maiden, neither of which I can cast yet, but Wim still hasn't done anything, so maybe it doesn't matter. I finally draw the mountain I need, and on turn 4, I've managed to get out Bird Maiden. Wim finally draws his second land and starts committing to the board with a Yoshin Soldier. I play out my Moorish Cavalry, which I can't attack with, but if I don't tap it down, then it's a solid blocker, which leaves me free to slice him down with Bird Maiden. But that plan changes pretty quickly when he drops a Royal Assassin. I really don't want to lose my Bird Maiden, and I'd prefer to not give up the defensive edge my cavalry is currently providing, so this puts me in a bit of a pinch. I try to figure out how to get his Royal Assassin tapped without losing a piece I really care about, because I have a plan for the Assassin. Unfortunately, I drew another land, so I'm kind of at a stalemate here. Then Wim drops the first Black Lotus I've seen in this game, and wow, I was not expecting that. Wim cracks the Lotus for blue, casts Twiddle on my Moorish Cavalry, and murders it with his Royal Assassin before casting a Carrion Ants. I draw another Plains, which is really making me consider gutting my land count, but I do have a solution to this Assassin at the very least. I cast my Unholy Strength on his Royal Assassin, which makes it a 3-2, so his Meekstone keeps it tapped. So I've managed to solve that problem at least. But it all went downhill from here. I drew some more lands, as well as a Tundra Wolf and a Wall of Bones, but I wasn't able to get through and eventually lost. Which is unfortunate, I really wanted a balance. I haven't really engaged with the more RPG features of the game so far. I'm mostly about the actual game of Magic, not the RPG around it, but my map is starting to grow, and as I reacclimatize to old school RPGs, I'm starting to get a better handle on the game and how to play. I do a few more quests, but for the most part I'm still more focused on acquiring cards than I am on anything else. Once you get your hand on some efficient removal, however, the game changes completely. After a lot of wins and losses and doing some quests, I got my hands on 2 Strip Mines, 2 Swords to Plowshares, a Disenchant, a Fireball, 2 Lightning Bolts, a Hurricane, and a Terror. This drastically improved my win percentage, and my deck was starting to play like a control deck. I would mostly remove their threats and swing in for the win with Mishra's Factory, which I could get fairly consistently because I now had 3 copies. My color consistency has also improved a lot because I started finding dual lands more commonly as well. They generally drop from the 2-colored enemies that spawn in, and I managed to get a few of them without really farming. And as you can see, I finally had the balls to play City of Brass and Contract from Below. The most questionable part of this list is probably Bird Maiden, but I'm gonna be real with you. I've been too harsh on Bird Maiden in the past. This stupid 1-2 flyer for 3 mana has won me so many fucking games. It gets under Meekstone. If it gets removed, I just traded a good card for my bad card, and yeah, this card is growing on me. And honestly, I don't have the heart to cut it. I'm also not broke now either. I haven't talked much about the money system in this game, but as I win better and more cards, it's easier to make money. The trick is to look at how much it costs for food whenever you're at a settlement. Villages and towns will likely buy and sell cards for cheap, whereas big cities will usually buy and sell food and cards for more money. So try to buy in villages and sell in cities, and you'll have more money than you know what to do with. But these duels have gotten easier and more consistent now that I have passable and good cards to use. Juggernaut is particularly effective if it doesn't get answered, but Mishra's Workshop is still my main win condition. Also, as I beat up enemies, the main evil wizards seem to lose power. The Staff of the Green Mage is particularly noticeable, which is cool. I still haven't really taken any effort to figure out how to actually beat this game, because I'm just having fun slinging virtual cardboard, but I will need to start focusing on that eventually. Still, even if I lose this game, I've learned a lot, and once I understand the mechanics behind the RPG part of the game, I'm sure I'll have a decent chance of beating it on my second try. It's also nice having a pile of money, because I don't have to battle with every random enemy that bumps into me. It's especially nice when my ante ends up being something I'd rather not risk. And with that being said, it's time I start taking the plot more seriously. Each of these 5 evil wizards is trying to control Shandalar, so they will occasionally capture cities. If you're paying attention, you can prevent this from happening, but you can also just defeat the wizard's vassal to free the city after the fact. So that's how I found myself in battle with Kishka Ra. The duel starts fairly normally. Kishkara has 24 health and I only had 13, and my hand is pretty rough. But that mind twist looks juicy, and if I can weather the storm, I think I have a real chance of handling this. But I hope I draw well. Kishkara starts off pressuring me immediately, but I draw a Dark Ritual which will help speed up my disruption plan immensely. Kishkara presses his advantage hard though by dropping a Mock Sapphire and putting an unstable mutation on his Banalish hero and dropping a Savannah Lions. I need to deal with this immediately, so I swords the Banalish, hoping to draw more removal soon. I am quickly running out of time. Kishkara drops me to 6, then puts out an Elvish Archers, so it's not looking too good for me. I really doubt I'll draw 2 removal spells with my next draw. And I draw a Mishra's Factory, which isn't the worst draw in the world here, but I'm going to need to trade it with the Savannah Lions. I can't block the Archer with it because the Archer will just kill it with First Strike. However, I'm not willing to sacrifice a Factory if I can help it, and since I can technically survive this damage, I decide to drop a Swamp for Mind Twist this turn instead. I think slowing his resources leads to a better chance of getting out of this issue, and the only life point that matters is the last one, so accepting the damage, I cast Mind Twist for 4, so Kishkara will drop his whole hand, but at 28 to 6, with his board presence, this is not looking good. None of the cards were particularly great, but I'd still rather he didn't have them. Then I take 4, and Kishkara manages to top deck something he could play, a 1/1 flyer, and that is a big issue for me. Luckily, it's a problem that is currently manageable. Immolation comes in clutch as hell. So I can play the Immolation on Elvish Archers to deal with them, then I can play Mishra's Factory and block the Savannah Lions to kill them. I'll take 1 point of damage and survive to see 1 more card. Also, it's important to turn your factory into an assembly worker before the declare blockers phase or you won't be able to block with it. I've made that mistake before and it really hurts your pride. So I trade with the Lions and take 1, so now I really don't have the luxury of taking hits. But I top deck a Swords to Plowshare, which tells me that as long as he doesn't draw a Lightning Bolt or something similar, I have another turn. However, I also have a Strip Mine and a Stone Rain, and he only has 2 lands, so I can make it really difficult for him to do anything to me next turn. Instead of waiting for the proper time, I once again just rip the swords on main phase and deal with his board, leaving him with a single Mock Sapphire. He does nothing with his next turn, which is really good news, and I draw a Mishra's Factory, which is excellent news. Next turn, I can start the slow process of chopping down 29 life. Hell yeah. Kishkara does nothing again, and I draw a Savannah, I play the Savannah, and I swing on him for 2. Then, I draw a Lightning Bolt, and Kish draws a Forest, which lets him cast a Falcon, which I immediately eviscerate with a Lightning Bolt. I can't really afford to leave up a flying 1/1. Nah, just kidding. I decide to play it cool, and wait until the last possible moment. I then draw a Swords to Plowshare, and I hit him with 2 for my land. I pass the turn to Kishra, he attacks for the win, and I eviscerate his Falcon with a Lightning Bolt. Nothing really happens for a bit as he plays an island and I draw a land, but soon I draw a Stone Rain as I blow up his forest, leaving him access to just blue mana. I was a little worried about leaving 2 blue up because he might be able to counterspell something, but I had to hedge my bets here, and having more colors means more chances at having playable cards. The gamble paid off for a turn, and now I've gotten him to 17. Man, this is a journey. In case you forgot, I'm at 1. My heart is pounding here. This is a pretty important duel. And speaking of which, I draw a Mana Vault, which I cannot really use. I have the mana to untap it if I need to, but that risks me missing a trigger and dying, and also, what could I even spend the mana on? Either way, I hit him for more, and my next draw is a Lightning Bolt, and I'm starting to feel a bit safer. He did just get access to green again, but having 2 solutions in my hand makes that easier to bear. Kishkara is still not able to do anything, and he now has a grip of 7 again, so it's pretty lucky that he hasn't drawn anything he can use. I draw another land, which is fine, not ideal, but it's okay. I attack again, and Kishkara casts Ancestral Recall, which is not such a good thing. He starts the next turn with 10 cards, but once again is unable to do anything. Still, he has seen a lot of cards, so he's more likely to draw into whatever he needs soon. I'm still at 1, but he discards 2 white cards and a Desert Twister. Next I draw a Juggernaut, which is such a breath of fresh air. This will really shorten how many attacks I need to make the reverse sweep of this game. And I've finally gotten Kishkara down to single digits. I'm coming for this victory like a freight train. But then Kishkara casts Time Twister, which could either be really good or really bad for me. I Lightning Bolt his face in response since I might as well, which takes him to 6. The Time Twister helps him because he finally has that white source he needs when he plays Mox Pearl and drops a Savannah Lion, which I immediately swords. Then it gets to my turn and I've won. I have 7 damage on board and a Lightning Bolt in my hand, so this is where my confidence turns to arrogance and I get a little sloppy with my play. I have Mind Twist in my hand again, and it brings me great joy to Mind Twist this Mox Haven asshole twice in one game while running 1 Mind Twist and no recursion. So I do the irresistible thing and I Mind Twist him to 4 cards. Then I fap around even further by wasting the rest of my mana on a Stream of Life to get myself to 4 life. Then I swing in with the Juggernaut for 5, taking him to exactly Lightning Bolt range, and I Lightning Bolt him for the win. This was such a wild game. My heart was racing the entire time, and stuff like this is what makes me appreciate Magic as a game engine. This was so fucking fun. I had the time of my life playing this particular match, and I saved a city. Felt like a real smart badass after this game. So let's look at how my deck has changed. It's still 4 colors, but the only white I run is for 3 swords and a single disenchant that hasn't really been useful very often. I've gotten Greed and Animate Dead, as well as that Mind Twist that's been so funny. Otherwise, black hasn't changed. I've added a Stone Rain and maxed out on Lightning Bolt, but still haven't had the heart to cut Bird Maiden. Birds of Paradise has come in to help with the color fixing, and Stream of Life actually pulls a lot of weight because I haven't bothered hunting down mana links. Sylvan Library also helps with my consistency a lot, and Ice Storm is just another Stone Rain, but in green. I've replaced the Dancing Scimitars with Juggernaut, which has made it much harder for me to fly over problems, but much easier to just go through them. Especially since a significant portion of my deck is removal. Then Mana Vault is just a second Dark Ritual that's mostly dead in this deck. It does help with Mind Twist and Lifestream though. And lastly, I've added Black Vice, but that's also less than useful as a singleton, especially since most opponents don't fill their hands back up. So that's the deck I have currently, and I'm feeling pretty confident about it. This game has been a blast, and I seriously recommend you play this if you get the chance. It's seriously a great time if you enjoy old Magic. And the best part is you get to play with a lot of cards you otherwise wouldn't find a chance to play. I have just one more duel to show you before we call it quits, and this next one was a wild time. The evil Black Wizard has sent his most trusted servant to test my strength, so let's show him the strength I've been able to grab. My opening hand is pretty awesome, so I feel good about this start. I don't have access to either the white or black that I need, but I do have Sylvan Library, so I can dig for it pretty effectively. Unfortunately, Sylvan Library's use will be less than optimal because I only have 12 life, which means I can't even keep 3 extra cards. But I can use it to look 2 cards deeper, and can indefinitely shift 1 or 2 cards I don't want so that I'll never draw them. It's not an ideal situation, but I do still feel pretty confident. My first library trigger shows that I have access to Lightning Bolt and 2 lands. Having lands in the shuffle is nice, and the Lightning Bolt might prove useful, but this isn't ideal. The next battle sucks even worse. Mana Vault is not something I need right now. I should really cut it, but it is Mana Vault, so I figured I'd at least see how it felt in the deck, but it's never felt good. Anyways, I use Immolation on the Scathe zombies, play out my land, and just vibe for now. Next comes out a Bog Wraith, a 3/3 Swamp Walker. I haven't drawn a black source this game, but it doesn't really matter since the only black I would need right now is for Terror, but that's unfortunately a dead card against mono black. Either way, I Lightning Bolt the Bog Wraith, and I forget to activate the Sylvan Library when I draw my card, so I get a Plains. Which is fine because it allows me to cast my Juggernaut and leave mana up for swords if he casts something major. He casts a Zombie Master, which is major enough for me to swords it. It can kill my Juggernaut, and it looks like I'll be relying on that Juggernaut for a while. I remember my library, and the pile is mana sources, which isn't ideal, but I'm scared to keep extra cards because each card is a third of my health total. I don't know if I'll need that life for something, so it's best to play this conservatively. I take the swamp because I don't have black, and I swing with Juggernaut. Next turn, the Necromancer casts Wall of Bone and a Swamp Walker. That's a little annoying. I send in Juggernaut because I don't really have much of a choice, and the Necromancer trades his Lost Soul for it. Which isn't the worst deal in the world, as he could have just kept blocking my Juggernaut with his Wall of Bone while he chumps my life down, so this play is way better for me. Then the Necromancer casts Cosmic Horror, which is a massive issue if I don't draw a way to deal with this. I draw a Lightning Bolt, which isn't really going to help in this situation, but it isn't over until it's over, and I can survive one hit from this thing. It's also worth mentioning that Cosmic Horror requires you to pay 6 mana during your upkeep or it deals 7 to you and is destroyed. Anyways, I take 8 damage from the Cosmic Horror and I activate the library hoping I can dig into a solution. And there it is, Strip Mine. Not necessarily the first card you'd think of when you think of creature removal, but in this case, this card is exactly what I needed. I can blow up one of his swamps, and even if he has another swamp in hand, he won't have the mana to pay its upkeep cost, and the Necromancer will take 7 damage and my problem will go away. So this is the perfect card in this situation, as long as he doesn't have a Dark Ritual. And it works like a charm, bringing him to 11 until he casts Throne of Bone and Scathe Zombies, bringing him back to 12. This is still going pretty well though. I draw a Mishra's Factory, which isn't really a great card in this situation, but it's also not the worst. It can at least chump for me once. Anyway, I bolt the zombie and draw an Ice Storm to beat him back a bit more. Then the Necromancer uses Evil Presence to turn my Mishra's Factory into a swamp, which is annoying but doesn't really ruin any of my current plans. Then nothing really happens for a few turns. I screw up my Sylvan Library by stacking the triggers wrong. You need to activate the Sylvan Library before you activate your card draw, or draw your card then activate it, but I stacked the triggers and screwed it up. Anyway, next turn I get a Swords, which is very nice. Then I get a Lightning Bolt, which is also sweet, but neither one of us has any way to threaten the other's life total, which is getting frustrating. Then I get a land drop, and neither of us do anything. Then I get a Stream of Life, and I tap out for it, because why not? This brings me up to 14, and now I can recklessly use Library if I so choose to. And I do choose to. I grab an extra card, mostly so I can dig deeper next turn, but I take a probably not useful Black Vice, and a more likely to be useful Mishra's Factory. Then I bolt the zombie he dropped. The next turn, I pull out another Mishra's Factory, so that's pretty sweet. I'm pretty confident I can start doing real damage to him, and I use the factory I played this turn to pump the one without Summoning Sickness and get in for 3 damage. Then the Necromancer drain lives me for 6, so I'm glad I wasn't more cavalier with my library. Anyway, nothing left to do but keep beating down, so I swing my factories at his face. The next turn, he uses Evil Presence again and takes away a second factory. This is starting to get annoying. I am running out of options here. Except I'm kinda not, because I can simply disenchant it, which I do. But then I see Animate Dead in my next few cards, and that card will drastically change things. So I cast Animate Dead, and I check through his yard for something impressive. I'm kind of running out of time. I think the longer this game goes, the more likely he is to just drain life me to death, and I highly doubt this mono black player will time twist me into a win, so I'm really left with no choice here. Cosmic Horror is a bad card, and it requires a massive upkeep cost, but luckily for me, the Necromancer has given me the gift of a third swamp, so I can pay this upkeep cost. I think it would be poetic to beat him down with his own animated Cosmic Horror, so that's what I do. I get myself an expensive 7/8, and I hit the Necromancer with my 2 factories, hoping like hell this guy isn't playing Strip Mine. Necromancer then spends half his mana casting a do-nothing enchantment, and I'm allowed to untap with my Cosmic Horror. I hit him with a Stone Rain for good measure, and drop him to 3 life. He does nothing on his last turn, and I take home the prize, in what is another fulfilling match. But I think that's enough gushing about Shandalar. I've shown off what were the funniest and funnest and most memorable parts of the 10 hours of my playtime, and it's honestly such a great game. I really recommend trying it out if you've never played. And if you have played, you should tell me about some of your favorite moments, because I would love to hear about them. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, as always. Like and subscribe if you give a shit, and I hope you have a magical day.